Watch the inspiring story of Kofi Owusu, a former wealthy Ghanaian businessman who rose to wealth and fell to poverty. Follow Kofi's journey as he confronts his past. Kofi Owusu stood at the edge of the bustling market, his eyes scanning the crowded stalls as if searching for a ghost from his past. The sounds of Accra, Ghana's capital city, swirled around him. The cacophony of car horns, the chatter of pedestrians, and the wail of sirens in the distance. It was a city that never slept, and yet, Kofi felt like a stranger in his own land. His mind wandered back to the days when he was the kingmaker, the man who held the power to shape the fate of nations. He had built a business empire from scratch, creating jobs and opportunities for thousands of people. His name was synonymous with success, and his influence extended far beyond the borders of Ghana. But that was before the scandal, before the allegations of corruption and bribery had tarnished his reputation, before the investors had pulled out, and his business partners had abandoned him, before his wife, Alma, had left him, taking their children with her. Kofi's eyes dropped to the ground, and he felt the weight of his mistakes bearing down on him. He had lost everything that truly mattered: his family, his reputation, and his sense of purpose. The sound of a car horn broke the spell, and Kofi looked up to see a taxi driver gesturing for him to get in. He hesitated for a moment before opening the door and sliding onto the worn vinyl seat. "Akrapong," Kofi said, his voice barely above a whisper. The driver, a gruff-looking man with a thick beard, raised an eyebrow. "You sure, boss? That's a long way." Kofi nodded, his eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. "I'm sure." As the taxi navigated the crowded streets of Accra, Kofi felt a sense of trepidation wash over him. He was returning to his humble beginnings, to the small village where he had grown up. It was a place he thought he had left behind forever. But life had a way of humbling us, didn't it? Kofi thought, a wry smile spreading across his face. The taxi finally emerged from the city's sprawl, and the landscape shifted to rolling hills and lush forests. Kofi felt a sense of peace settle over him, as if the very earth itself was welcoming him back. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the landscape, the taxi turned onto a dirt road, and Kofi caught his first glimpse of Akrapong. The village was nestled in a valley, surrounded by towering trees and a meandering river. Kofi's heart swelled with emotion as he gazed upon the familiar landscape. It was a place where time stood still, where the rhythms of nature still held sway. The taxi driver, sensing Kofi's nostalgia, smiled in the rearview mirror. "Welcome home, boss." Kofi nodded, his eyes never leaving the village. He knew that he had a long journey ahead of him, one of redemption and self-discovery. But as he stepped out of the taxi and onto the dusty earth of Akrapong, he felt a sense of hope that he had not felt in years. Maybe, just maybe, this was where his true journey began. As Kofi walked through the village, he was greeted by familiar faces. Some of the villagers looked at him with curiosity, while others seemed wary. Kofi understood their skepticism. He had left Akrapong as a young man, full of ambition and idealism. Now he was returning as a fallen giant, his reputation tarnished by scandal. Kofi made his way to his ancestral home, a small, rustic building with a thatched roof. The house had been in his family for generations, and it held a special place in his heart. As he approached the door, he felt a sense of trepidation. What would he find inside? The door creaked as Kofi pushed it open. The interior was dimly lit, with only a few rays of sunlight peeking through the windows. Kofi's eyes adjusted slowly, and he saw that the house was spotless, with everything in its place. His aunt, Akua, had obviously been taking care of the property. Kofi's eyes landed on a familiar object, an old wooden chest that had belonged to his father. He felt a pang of nostalgia as he lifted the lid, revealing a treasure trove of memories. There were old photographs, letters, and mementos from his childhood. As Kofi delved deeper into the chest, he found a small leather-bound book. It was his father's journal, filled with wisdom and insights gained from a lifetime of experience. Kofi's eyes welled up with tears as he read the words, feeling a deep connection to his heritage. Suddenly, Kofi heard a faint noise behind him. He turned to see his aunt, Akua, standing in the doorway, a warm smile on her face. "Kofi, my child," she said, opening her arms. "Welcome home." Kofi felt a lump form in his throat as he hugged his aunt tightly. It was a moment of pure joy, one that he would cherish forever. As they pulled back, Akua looked at Kofi with piercing eyes. "You've come home to heal, haven't you?" she asked, her voice filled with compassion. Kofi nodded, feeling a sense of vulnerability. "I've made mistakes, Auntie. I need to find my way again." Akua nodded, her expression softening. "You're home now, Kofi. We'll help you find your way." And with that, Kofi felt a weight lift off his shoulders. He knew that he still had a long journey ahead of him, but for the first time in years, he felt a sense of hope. As the days passed, Kofi settled into a routine in Akrapong. He spent his mornings helping his aunt with her farm work, learning about the intricacies of sustainable farming and the importance of community. In the afternoons, he would often take long walks through the village, reconnecting with old friends and making new ones. One person who caught his attention was a young woman named Adwoa. She was a skilled artisan, known for her beautiful textiles and crafts. Kofi was struck by her creativity and passion, and the two of them quickly became fast friends. As Kofi spent more time with Adwoa, he began to see the village through her eyes. He realized that Akrapong was more than just a place to escape his past. It was a community that was full of life, full of potential. One day, as they sat together under the shade of a mango tree, Adwoa turned to Kofi with a curious expression. "What brings you back to Akrapong, Kofi?" she asked, her voice filled with genuine interest. Kofi hesitated, unsure of how to answer. He had been running from his past for so long. He wasn't sure he was ready to face it. But as he looked into Adwoa's eyes, he felt a sense of trust wash over him. "I came back to heal," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I made mistakes, Adwoa. I hurt people, and I lost everything that truly mattered." Adwoa nodded, her expression softening. "We all make mistakes, Kofi," she said. "But it takes courage to admit them, to face them head-on." Kofi felt a lump form in his throat as he looked at Adwoa. She was right, of course. It did take courage to face his mistakes, to confront the demons of his past. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the village, Kofi felt a sense of determination wash over him. He was ready to face his past, to make amends, and to start anew. But just as he was about to take the first step on his journey of redemption, a stranger arrived in Akrapong, bringing with him a proposal that would change everything. The stranger, a tall, imposing figure with a sharp jawline and piercing eyes, stepped out of a sleek black SUV and onto the dusty streets of Akrapong. He was dressed in a crisp, tailored suit, and his presence seemed to command attention. Kofi watched with interest as the stranger approached the village elder, Nana Osei. They spoke in hushed tones, their conversation punctuated by gestures and nods. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the village in a warm orange glow, the stranger turned to face the gathering crowd. "Greetings, people of Akrapong," he said, his voice booming across the village square. "My name is Kwame Mensah, and I represent the Ghanaian Investment Corporation." Kofi's eyes narrowed as Kwame continued to speak. "We are proposing a major development project for Akrapong," Kwame announced. "A luxury resort, complete with world-class amenities and infrastructure. We believe this project will bring much-needed jobs and economic growth to your community." The villagers looked at each other uncertainly, their faces reflecting a mix of excitement and concern. Kofi, however, felt a surge of unease. He knew that Kwame's proposal came with a steep price, one that would compromise the very essence of Akrapong. As the villagers began to discuss the proposal among themselves, Kofi stepped forward. "I think we should be cautious," he said, his voice firm but measured. We need to consider the potential impact on our community, our environment, and our way of life. Kwame's eyes locked onto Kofi's, a hint of challenge in his gaze. "And who are you to question our proposal?" he asked, his voice dripping with condescension. Kofi stood tall, his shoulders squared. "I am Kofi Owusu," he said, his voice steady. "And I am a son of Akrapong." The villagers looked at Kofi with newfound respect, their faces reflecting a sense of pride and solidarity. Kwame, however, seemed taken aback by Kofi's bold declaration. As the night wore on, the debate continued, with Kofi and Kwame on opposite sides of the argument. But Kofi knew that this was more than just a battle of words. It was a fight for the very soul of Akrapong. As the debate raged on, Kofi found himself at odds with Kwame, who seemed determined to push the development project through, regardless of the cost. But Kofi refused to back down. He rallied the villagers, organizing protests and petitions against the project. Adwoa stood by his side, using her artistic talents to create powerful posters and banners. As tensions escalated, Kofi received a surprise visit from his estranged wife, Amma. She had heard about the conflict in Akrapong and had come to offer her support. Kofi was taken aback by Amma's sudden appearance, but he was grateful for her help. Together, they worked tirelessly to raise awareness about the potential dangers of the development project. Meanwhile, Kwame grew increasingly desperate. He began to use underhanded tactics to sway the villagers, including bribery and intimidation. But Kofi and his allies refused to give up. They organized a massive protest, marching through the streets of Akrapong and demanding that the government intervene. The protest made national headlines, and soon the government was forced to take notice. A team of investigators was sent to Akrapong to look into the development project and its potential impact on the community. As the investigators dug deeper, they uncovered a web of corruption and deceit that went all the way to the top. Kwame was arrested, and the development project was scrapped. The villagers celebrated their victory, and Kofi was hailed as a hero. He had saved the village from destruction, and in doing so, had found redemption. As Kofi looked out at the crowd of villagers, he felt a sense of pride and purpose. He had come a long way since his days as a ruthless businessman, and he knew that he still had a lot to learn. But for now, he was content to bask in the glow of his triumph. He had found a new family in the villagers, and he knew that he would always stand up for what was right. Adwoa approached him, a smile on her face. "Kofi, you did it," she said, her eyes shining with tears. "You saved our village." Kofi smiled back, feeling a sense of gratitude towards her. "We did it together," he said. "We stood up for what was right, and we fought for our community." As the villagers cheered and chanted his name, Kofi knew that he had finally found his true purpose. He was no longer the ruthless businessman he once was, but a champion of justice and a defender of the vulnerable. And as he looked out at the crowd, he knew that he would always stand up for what was right, no matter the cost. Years later, Kofi would look back on his journey and realize that it was the struggles that had made him stronger. He had found redemption in the unlikeliest of places, and he had discovered a new sense of purpose. Akrapong had become a thriving community, thanks in part to Kofi's efforts. The village was a model for sustainable development, and people came from all over to learn from their example. Kofi's story had inspired a new generation of leaders, and his name had become synonymous with courage and integrity. And though he still had his flaws, Kofi knew that he had finally found his true place in the world. He was a champion of justice, a defender of the vulnerable, and a hero to many. Redemption and forgiveness are possible, no matter how far we may have fallen. Taking responsibility for our actions, Kofi acknowledges his past mistakes and takes steps to make amends. Standing up for what is right, Kofi fights against injustice and corruption, even when it's difficult. Finding a new sense of purpose, Kofi discovers a new passion for helping others and making a positive impact. Like and subscribe for more inspiring stories.